In 1996, when I was a wee little lad of 9 years old, I fell in love with a video game called Resident Evil. Now in the late 90s, Resident Evil ushered in the golden age of survival horror games, and over the next 30 years this would become my niche passion. I would collect and play every single wacky, wonderful and terrifying survival horror game that I could get my hands on. How's it going, guys? It's Nate here from Retro Horror Gamer and welcome to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be recommending you guys 10 horror games that I feel that you should play before you die. And this is going to be a nice little mix of modern and retro games, so hopefully you find something new that you've never heard of and you're going to go play. Clock Tower isn't for everyone, especially if you prefer modern polished horror with combat like Resident Evil. But if you want a game that generally makes your palms sweat, your pulse race, and leaves you feeling deeply unsettled long after turning it off, this classic is worth experiencing. It pioneered so much what makes survival horror great: helplessness, atmosphere, and that primal fear of being hunted. Developed by Human Entertainment as a sequel to Japan-only SNES original, this point-and-click adventure drops you into the shoes of Jennifer Simpson, or Helen, in Branching Paths, returning survivors of the previous nightmare as a new wave of gruesome murders unfold. No guns, no fighting back. It's just you, a mansion and other locations full of secrets, and the relentless pursuit of the iconic Scissor Man with his giant shears. The controls are pure 90s point-and-click cursor-driven exploration, puzzle solving and quick decisions under pressure. It feels clunky by modern standards, tank control-like movement, pixel hunting and some trial and error deaths. But that awkwardness actually amplifies the helplessness. You're not a badass hero, you're a terrified teenager whose only real tools are hiding spots, running and screaming. Panic mode kicks in when you're spotted or you're startled. Your character becomes hard to control, stumbles, and the tension skyrockets. What makes Clock Tower special is how it builds dread through atmosphere rather than constant action. The game is often eerily quiet, with echoing footsteps, distant sounds, and a haunting soundtrack that switches from somber piano to frantic chase themes. Environments are detailed for the era, with dim lighting, creaking floors, and the sudden reveals that feel cinematic. Scissor Man doesn't just chase you, he stalks, laughs manically, and appears when you least expect it, turning every room into a potential death trap. This game excels at psychological fear and raw panic. It doesn't rely on cheap jump scares, even though there are a few effective ones. Instead, it creates a constant oppressive sense of vulnerability. You know Scissor Man is coming, but the uncertainty of when and how keeps your heart pounding. Hiding in a closet or under a bed while hearing his approaching footsteps and that signature scissor snip sound is pure nightmare fuel. You hold your breath praying he passes by. The fear feels personal, intimate. Jennifer's panic animations, her screams, and the way the music swells makes you feel her horror. Multiple endings and branching paths add replayability, but each run keeps you on edge, wondering if one wrong click will lead to a brutal death animation. It's the kind of game that makes you jump at shadows in real life after playing it. Quiet hallways feel menacing, and the sudden noise in your room triggers flashbacks of that damn laugh. Many players from the era, and even now, call it one of the scariest experiences on the PlayStation 1, invoking slasher movie vibes where the killer is unstoppable and you're just the prey. Crow Country is a standout in the modern wave of retro survival horror revivals. It understands exactly what made games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill special: the careful exploration, limited resources, interconnected maps, and the oppressive atmosphere. While smoothing out the rough edges for today's players, on modern systems it runs smoothly and looks fantastic in a deliberate lo-fi style. If you're a fan of the genre's roots, or curious about where survival horror began before it went action heavy, this is an essential play. It's accessible enough for newcomers, but deep and respectful enough for veterans of survival horror. Released in 2024 by SFB, Crow Country is a delightful retro-styled survival horror experience that feels like a direct spiritual successor to the PlayStation 1 classics. Set in a derelict amusement park called Crow Country, you play as Myra, who arrives at the mysterious closed-down park in search of the missing owner. What unfolds is a creepy tale filled with mutated creatures, dark secrets, corporate conspiracies, and plenty of atmosphere. Crow Country wears its influences proudly on its sleeve, drawing heavily from the golden era of survival horror, primarily the original Resident Evil, especially the Mansion's Exploration, Silent Hill and other late 90s titles. It uses fixed camera angles, low 3D poly aesthetics reminiscent of the PlayStation 1 era, tank controls and a deliberate pace that emphasises exploration, resource management and puzzle solving over run and gun action. You'll spend your time mapping out interconnected areas of the theme park like rides, attractions, back rooms and creepy forests, finding keys, solving environmental puzzles and carefully managing limited ammo and healing items. Enemies, twisted animatronics and other horrors aren't endless. Combat is risky and often best avoided to conserve ammo for when necessary. This scarcity creates genuine tension. Every shot counts and backtracking feels rewarding rather than tedious, thanks to the new shortcuts and story revelations. The game smartly modernises the formula without losing its soul. There's an exploration mode that removes combat for those who just want the story and the puzzles, perfect for horror newcomers, while survival mode delivers the classic resource-starved challenge. Puzzles are clever and fair and integrated into the environment, often tied to the park's lore through memos and notes that flesh out the world. Visually, Crow Country nails that nostalgic PlayStation 1 charm with beautiful lighting, fog, and a haunting colour palette that makes the once cheerful amusement park feel deeply unsettling. Abandoned rides creak in the wind, shadows play tricks, and the soundtrack blends ambient unease with memorable tracks. The body horror elements and grotesque creatures hit hard, blending whimsical with dread in a way that feels unique. The story is surprisingly heartfelt and well written, mixing humour, tragedy and twists. Myra is a likeable protagonist with snark and heart, and the supporting cast adds personality. It's not just jump scares, it builds on a compelling mystery that keeps you pushing forward, much like the narrative depth in Silent Hill. Song of Horror is one of the best modern tributes to classic survival horror and adventure games. Its suffocating atmosphere and psychological touches creates a deeply unsettling experience that lingers long after playing. Developed by Protocol Games and released in 2020, it's a love letter to old school survival horror and adventure games. It follows a group of characters investigating the disappearance of a famous writer and the dark supernatural force known as the Presence that haunts his estate and beyond. Structured in chapters with different playable protagonists, the game blends point and click style exploration with fixed camera angles and high stake tension. You explore eerie interconnected locations, solving environmental puzzles, collecting items and uncovering lore through notes and objects. A key mechanic is the roguelike inspired permadeath. Characters can die permanently if caught by the Presence, forcing you to continue with others and altering availability for later chapters. There's no combat, survival relies on hiding, running and using the environment. The game emphasises deliberate pacing, inventory management and careful observation. Song of Horror shines brightest in its atmospheric and psychological horror, invoking Resident Evil's fixed camera angles and Silent Hill's oppressive dread whilst adding modern twists. The horror is patient and immersive. Rather than relentless action, it rewards caution and the exploration, whilst punishing recklessness, creating genuine fear through anticipation.
The phone. Should I answer?
The permadeath and multiple protagonists heighten vulnerability. You care about each character's fate, making losses impactful. The game is saturated with dread. Dimly lit mansions, abandoned theatres and fog-shrouded streets feel alive with menace. Real-time lighting from flashlights or candles cast dramatic shadows, whilst the haunting soundtrack and ambient noises like whispers, piano notes, scratching build unease. Sanity-like effects like hallucinations, screen distortions or subtle environmental changes add psychological layers without any traditional meter.
It all began as an ordinary day in September. An ordinary day in Raccoon City, a city controlled by Umbrella. No one dared to oppose them. and that lack of strength would ultimately lead to their destruction. I suppose they had to suffer the consequences of their actions, but there would be no forgiveness. If only they had had the courage to fight. It's true that once the wheels of justice begin to turn, nothing can stop them. Nothing. It was Raccoon City's last chance, and my last chance. My last escape.
Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, developed and published by Capcom, is one of the standout entries in the original Resident Evil trilogy on the PlayStation. It follows Jill Valentine as she tries to escape the zombie-infested Raccoon City whilst being relentlessly hunted by the iconic bioweapon Nemesis. It expands the universe with new characters, locations, and a strong emphasis on evasion and resource management, making it a quintessential survival horror experience. Like its predecessors, RE3 uses tank controls, fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds. You explore a more open, interconnected version of Raccoon City, solving puzzles, collecting key items and managing a limited inventory. The game introduces branching paths and multiple endings based on your choices and performance, adding replay value. Combat involves a mixture of guns and knives, but ammo and healing items are scarce enough to make every encounter feel risky. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis emphasises the genre at its peak by balancing vulnerability, atmosphere and constant pressure. The relentless pursuer, the game's most iconic horror element, is Nemesis himself. This towering trench-coated monster hunts Jill across the city with rocket launchers, tentacles and brute force. He doesn't just appear in set pieces, he stalks you through large sections of the game, forcing you to run and hide or fight strategically. Encounters create heart-pounding panic as you decide whether to use precious ammo or flee through shortcuts. His sudden appearances amplify dread like few other video game antagonists.
You're still wandering around.
Nikolai?
So, you want to get out of here alone? Is that your plan?
I made certain none of the other supervisors survived. Since I'll be the only one who knows what really happened, I'll have more bargaining power when it comes to discussing my bonus.
Resident Evil 3 is a high point for classic survival horror. It redefines the formula from Resident Evil 1 and 2 while introducing the relentless pursuer concept that influenced countless games afterwards. The constant threat of Nemesis combined with smart resource management and a gripping narrative creates an experience that makes you feel genuinely vulnerable and immersed in Raccoon City's nightmare. Cold Fear is a solid and often overlooked PlayStation 2 survival horror gem that uses its stormy ship setting to create unique tension and dread. The combination of environmental hazards, parasitic horrors, and the classic resource management make it a standout in the genre. While it has some rough edges by modern standards, its atmosphere and ideas make it worth playing for any fan of survival horror. Developed by Darkwoods and published by Ubisoft, it's an underappreciated survival horror title set aboard a storm-battered Russian whaling ship in the Bering Sea. You play as a US Coast Guard investigating a distress call, only to uncover a nightmarish outbreak of parasitic creatures and undead horrors. The game blends action with horror, emphasising the harsh, unstable maritime environment. Cold Fear uses third-person perspective with tank controls typical of mid-2000 horror games. You explore the tilting waved rock ship, solving puzzles, managing limited ammo and health and fighting mutated enemies. A key mechanic is the ship's constant motion. Decks pitch and roll with the storm, affecting your aim and movement and cover. This adds a layer of realism and challenge. The campaign is linear but atmospheric, with some backtracking and environmental interaction. The raging sea is almost a character itself. Shifting gravity, flooding corridors, swinging cargo, and the slippery deck make every movement feel precarious. This disorientation heightens tension. You're not just fighting monsters but battling the ship and nature. It creates a sense of helplessness and vulnerability rare in the genre. The game feels like Resident Evil meets the Poseidon Adventure with a dash of like Dead Space before it ever existed, delivering solid survival horror thrills. The derelict ship is drenched in rain, blood and shadows. Dynamic lighting, cracking metal, howling wind and the sudden blackouts build dread. Sound design is excellent. Distant screams, wet organic sounds and the roar of the ocean keep you on edge. The story mixes military thriller with Lovecraftian undertones of an ancient parasitic threat. threat. So the next survival horror game I want to recommend you guys is Silent Hill Shattered Memories, but the port on the Wii because it's the best way to play this game. Silent Hill Shattered Memories, developed by Climax Studios and published by Konami, is a reimagining of the very first Silent Hill game. You once again step into the role of Harry Mason searching for his missing daughter Cheryl after a car crash in the fog-shrouded, snow-covered town. What unfolds is a less than traditional retelling and more of a psychological thriller that deeply twists the original story. On the Wii, it leverages the console's unique hardware for an intimate, immersive experience that stands out in the series. Shattered Memories radically reinvents the survival horror formula. There is no combat whatsoever. Harry is an ordinary man with no weapons. Your primary tools are a flashlight controlled directly by the Wii remote and your cell phone for calls and photos and maps. Exploration in the normal world involves puzzle solving, environmental interaction, and piecing together the mystery through notes, conversations, and therapy sessions with Dr. Kaufman. This creates a deeply personal survival horror experience. The game feels like it's watching you and judging you, tailoring the dread to your psyche. The flashlight mechanic is brilliant on the Wii, pointing the remote to sweep away darkness, building incredible immersion and tension as you frantically try to keep threats visible whilst navigating narrow collapsing paths. Dynamic music shifts based on proximity to danger, heightening the unease. The game excels at psychological horror rather than gore and jump scares, even though there are some effective shocks. The fog, snow and shifting realities creates an oppressive, melancholic atmosphere that feels deeply unsettling. Environments are detailed for the Wii with strong use of lighting and sound to invoke isolation and paranoia. The story explores themes of trauma, memory, grief and self-deception in a mature, symbolic way that rewards multiple playthroughs. Different endings are based on your profile. Shattered Memories is a daring evolution of survival horror that focuses on psychological tension, helplessness, and the personal unease over traditional monster bashing. On the original Wii hardware, it's at its best, intimate, innovative, and generally unsettling in a few ways that games achieve. It may not be the scariest entry in the series for everyone, but its bold ideas, atmosphere, and emotional core make it a standout and one of the most memorable Wii experiences. Condemned Criminal Origins, developed by Monolith Productions and published by Sega, is a first-person survival horror action game that launched as a flagship title for the Xbox 360. You play as Ethan Thomas, an FBI agent investigating a series of grotesque murders while also dealing with his own deteriorating mental state. The game blends gritty urban decay, psychological terror, and a brutal melee combat system into one of the most immersive and disturbing horror experiences of its generation. Unlike traditional shooters, Condemned emphasises close-quarter melee combat using improvised weapons like pipes, boards, axes, and even mannequin parts. Guns are rare and ammo is extremely limited, forcing you to scavenge and fight hand-to-hand against deranged infected civilians and other horrors. Forensic tools like UV lights and tasers add a unique investigative layer for crime scenes, although they're more atmospheric than deep puzzle solving. Levels are largely linear but packed with detail, abandoned department stores, derelict subways and creepy apartments. What sets Condemned apart is its masterful horror design. The developers focused on three pillars: shock, sudden brutal encounters and jump scares, tension, constant anticipation in the dark and claustrophobic environments, and psychological dread, hallucinations, paranoia, and blurring the line between reality and Ethan's crumbling mind. The atmosphere is oppressively thick, dim lighting, flickering fluorescence, rain-soaked streets, and the decaying interior creates a sense of isolation and unease. Sound design is phenomenal. Creaking floors, distant screams, whispering, and the wet thuds of combat make every corner feel dangerous. Enemies don't just attack, they lurk, crawl from vents, smash through walls, or stand eerily still amongst mannequins before laughing. The mannequins in the department store level and the basement sequences are particularly infamous for inducing panic. As the game progresses, the horror intensifies with supernatural undertones mixed with raw, realistic violence. Ethan's visions and the increasingly nightmarish setting make you question what's real, amplifying the psychological impact. It feels like a blend of Seven, Urban Decay horror films, and early survival horror, but with a next-gen at the time visceral gore and animations. Many players still call it one of the scariest Xbox 360 experiences, especially with headphones on in a dark room. Onimusha Warlords is a landmark PlayStation 2 game that successfully blends action-adventure with survival horror elements. Its resource management, tense exploration and demonic threats create a compelling hybrid that still holds up till today. For fans of classic Capcom titles or anyone wanting stylish samurai action with horror undertones, it's essential. Developed and published by Capcom, you play as Samanosuke, a skilled swordsman in feudal Japan who gains demonic Oni powers to battle the Genma, supernatural demon forces invading the land. The game blends stylish melee combat, puzzle solving and exploration in a dark atmospheric world inspired by Resident Evil's design philosophy. Onimusha features tank controls, fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds reminiscent of classic survival horror. You explore castles, villages and dungeons, solving environmental puzzles, managing inventory including herbs for healing and weapons, and upgrading your Oni gauntlet to absorb souls for power-ups. Combat is real-time melee focused with timing based attacks, combos and special moves. The game's linear but interconnected structure encourages backtracking as you gain new abilities. While primarily an action game with samurai flair, Onimusha carries strong survival horror DNA from Capcom's Resident Evil roots. The pre-rendered backgrounds are beautifully designed and moody with dim lighting, fog, blood-stained corridors and an eerie sound design. Fixed camera angles often hide threats or create dramatic reveals, building dread around corners. The Genma enemies, undead warriors, giant insects and grotesque demons, feel threatening and otherworldly, enhanced by the dark feudal Japan setting. Exploration mixes quiet, puzzle-heavy sections with sudden ambushes. Boss fights and narrow escapes amplify the horror adventure feel. The absorbing of souls mechanic adds a rhythmic urgency as you quickly collect them before they dissipate, keeping you engaged in the combat areas. The horror is more atmospheric and adventurous than pure terror, but the survival mechanics and oppressive environments make it feel like a samurai-flavoured Resident Evil. Dead Reset is a solid, bloody FMV horror experience that shines brightest in its practical effects, claustrophobic setting, and looping mystery. On the PS5, it offers a cinematic, choice-driven ride, perfect for fans of interactive movie games or sci-fi horrors such as Aliens. It's not revolutionary, but its gruesome charm and tense loops make for a fun, gory experience. Developed by Dark Rift Horror and Wales Interactive, it's a full-motion video FMV interactive horror adventure released in 2025 for the PlayStation 5 and other platforms. You play as Dr. Cole Mason, a surgeon kidnapped and trapped in an underwater facility with no memory. Forced into a nightmarish time loop, you must operate on a patient harbouring a parasitic horror whilst uncovering conspiracies, making life or death choices and trying to break the cycle of death. It blends B-movie camp with genuine tension in a combined blood-soaked setting. As an FMV game, Dead Reset plays as an interactive horror movie. You watch live action sequences and make branching choices that affect the story, character fates and how the loop progresses. Each death resets the timeline with new information or altered events, encouraging multiple playthroughs to see different outcomes and endings. Puzzles are light, mostly choice driven, and focus is on decision making under pressure rather than traditional gameplay mechanics. The horror balances jump scares, gore and slow building dread with the occasional campy B-movie charm, making it gruesome yet entertaining rather than purely terrifying. The Darkness is an underrated gem on the Xbox 360 that stands out for its bold fusion of genres. Developed by Starbreeze Studios and published by 2K Games, it's a first-person shooter with deep, supernatural horror roots. Adapted from the cult classic comic book series, you play as Jackie, a young mob enforcer who on his 21st birthday becomes the host to an ancient demonic entity known as the Darkness. What starts off as a gritty crime story quickly spirals into a tale of vengeance, loss, and other otherworldly terror as Jackie battles rival gangs whilst grappling with the monstrous power inside him. The game blends covered-based shooting with unique darkness powers that activate in low light. This could be like summoning mischievous darklings, imp-like creatures, deploying black holes, and wielding demonic tentacles. You can also dual-wield guns while the darkness handles close quarters. The campaign mixes linear story missions with some exploration in stylised New York City, including memorable side content like playing a World War II inspired horror dimension called The Otherworld. The darkness excels at atmospheric supernatural horror woven into a modern mob setting. The core horror comes from the symbiotic and often antagonistic relationship with the entity itself, voiced creepily by Mike Patton, which taunts Jackie, feeds on death and forces him to confront his inner demons. Darklings, these chaotic, vulgar little demons, are equal parts comic relief and horrifying minions. Watching them tear apart enemies, crawl through vents, or perform sadistic executions adds a grotesque, playful edge to the horror. The game drips with moody, rain-soaked urban dread. Dark alleyways, abandoned subways, and blood-soaked interiors create an oppressive feel. Gore is versatile, tentacles rip out hearts, bodies being devoured, and the sound design, whispers, screams, and the darkness mocking voices heighten paranoia. Themes of grief and control and damnation give psychological weight beyond jump scares. Wesker comes back.